Jeff here. Last time you watched as the front end of the Colt went from this to this. Join me in another episode where we drop in a 4G63 right here on FastLab. After removing the cylinder head, I can check the condition of our used 6-bolt 4G63. This motor has been beefed up with an O-ring block, Manley connecting rods, ARP 2000 rod bolts, Wiseco pistons, and ARP head studs. Removing the valve cover reveals more goodies. 272 regrind camshafts, but those stock valve springs and retainers have to go. I picked up a valve spring removal and install tool from PQY on Amazon. It comes with all the necessary hardware needed and makes changing them out way easier. Replacements will be a set of Crowler valve springs and titanium retainers, as well as some stainless steel valves. These combustion chambers can definitely benefit from some cleaning up. The PQY valve install and removal tool is very simple to use, bolting onto the head where the cam caps used to go, and then uses an Allen head bolt and a cup to compress the valve spring for removal of the keepers that lock it in place. It can do both intake or exhaust valve springs before you have to remove it to go onto the next cylinder's valve springs. After removal of the old valve and a quick cleanup, the valves can be reinstalled after lapping it with valve lapping compound available at any retail auto parts store. The quench area in this head now looks almost as good as new. The Crowler valve springs and titanium retainers are sitting pretty, pictured here with the revised lifters. After a new head gasket and copper O-rings, it was finally time to drop the engine in. A Gates Kevlar racing timing belt and a new timing belt component kit were used. Now it's finally time for some Go Fast parts. The turbo manifold is a one-off, forward-facing custom manifold from DB Fabrications in Tampa, Florida. It uses a T4 flange and tile 44mm wastegate flange with both V-band exhaust and wastegate pipe pointing out of the hood of the car. EGT bungs are placed at every exhaust runner as well as the collector for monitoring temps while racing. With thick flanges and heavy-duty steel piping, it can withstand the weight of the larger frame T4 turbos without the need of bracing. To help put the power to the ground, a 1G Turbo DSM front-wheel drive transmission was used, and an ACT Streetlight flywheel and ACT 3200 Extreme clutch kit with a 4-puck unsprung clutch disc. The T4 Turbo I chose for the Colt is a limited production VS Racing 6162. These units are equivalent to a Garrett GT 3582, and lots of people seem to be running these turbos, especially the VA crowd, so I decided to give it a shot. With an 82 AR exhaust housing and upgraded billet wheel, it should have more than enough airflow needed to get us into the 10s. I will be using a 10AN oil return line, but it appears the one I had from an earlier mock-up turbo is the incorrect size bolt pattern. A quick run to Jegs, and I have the correct adapter for a GT35 Turbo. After installing the gasket, I can tighten down the supplied bolts and mount the turbo to the manifold. As I drop it into place with a new gasket, it seems like the position is perfect. I couldn't be happier with the fitment. It clears everything and looks amazing. It's almost a shame it sits stealthily behind the Colt's front grille. Next, I bolt on the 3-inch V-band exhaust that will dump out of the hood. And I drop the nut. After finding the nut 2 miles down the road in a cornfield somewhere, I finished putting the exhaust on. With each new part, it looks more and more like a race car. Next up is the oil drain, and after routing it a few different ways, I ended up routing it this way as it was a continuous downward path back to the oil pan. Wrapping it in a DEI protective sleeve should help keep the heat at bay. For spark, a JM Fabrications coil relocation bracket was used on the back of the block, along with a set of MagnaCore plug wires. There are plenty of setups and people who swear by using the stock coil. As well as dyno proof, it can be used at almost any power level. The JMF bracket hides the coil underneath the intake manifold out of sight for a cleaner look. With the use of the custom forward-facing manifold, the alternator must be relocated to the back of the block. I opted for the steel version of the J Racing Alternator relocation kit, as it comes with all the necessary brackets, hardware, and even the belt. The first bracket gets installed at the back of the block utilizing a pre-existing bolt hole location. The folks at J Racing developed the kit to be used with the factory intermediate shaft. Installation of the intermediate shaft is fairly simple. Sliding the shaft into place on the driver's side of the gearbox is easiest. With some pushing and some wiggling, it should seat into place. Usually you would have to buy a special spacer when deleting the AC system to attach the intermediate shaft, but the J Racing kit eliminates the need for this spacer as it bolts directly to the intermediate shaft. With another supplied bracket bolted to the alternator, I put it down in position and installed the supplied belt. After extending the alternator wires, I reattach them to the alternator and put the correct tension on the belt. I'd like to take a moment to shed some light on how difficult it is sometimes to get appropriate lighting for a shot. but some studio lighting through the front of the car seems to help. Since we will be spending most of our time in the upper RPMs with this car, an intake manifold with short runners was chosen. Attached is a 1G DSM throttle body and a 2G throttle body elbow, as all of our piping will be 2.5 inches. We will be pairing it with a Honda heat shield gasket to try and curb heat soak from the engine block. This steel manifold was heavy, so a friend was definitely needed to help hold it into position. So I called up my buddy Josh. He's always down to help out with wrenching, and we have worked on so many projects over the years. Be sure to give him a like and a follow on Instagram @BrewTube. I will be sure to post a link in the description below on this video. With Josh holding the manifold in place, I can attach the nuts and bolts. The intercooler we will be using is a Punishment Racing intercooler with a tile blow-off valve on the end of it, thanks to the welding skills from Slowmotion Motorsports. Slowmo has always been there for me when I needed parts or service, and I highly recommend them because of the knowledgeable staff and technicians. As more time passes and more parts get bolted to this ship box, it makes me feel like we may have a shot at 10s on the strip. Well, that about wraps it up for this episode. Please like, comment, and share for more. Thank you.